This edition of MacVoices is brought to you by Drobo. Simple, safe, expandable storage for your data. To get $90 off a Drobo Gen 3, Drobo 5D, or Drobo 5N, visit drobostore.com and use the offer code HOLIDAYCHUCK. Welcome to Mac Notables on MacVoices. This is the Talk of the Mac community. I'm Chuck Joyner. Folks, as we run down the tracks toward the end of the year, we thought it was the perfect time to reconnect with two of our favorite Mac Notables. Well, that's not true. They're all our favorites, but, you know.
No, Chuck. Let's be real, Chuck. We are your favorites.
I'm going to get in trouble with everybody else.
That doesn't matter. They're not here.
We might be some of your first Mac Notables.
Okay, yeah. Well, you're definitely the first. In fact, I don't think we ever added anybody to the original panel. When we did. So first up, of course, Ms. Tonya Engst, because we always do ladies first. Tonya, it's great to see you. Thanks for being here.
Hello, Chuck. It's lovely to be here.
Yes, it's lovely to be here. And of course, Mr. Adam Engst. I think he's some relation to Tonya.
Something or other.
Yeah.
Nice to be here.
Yeah. Yeah, it's been a while since we've had a chance to catch up with you two, and I thought you two would be a good two to sort of look back on the year from a bunch of different perspectives. Obviously, the Apple perspective and all the developments, but also you two have a lot of things going, notably Tidbits and Take Control. You're a huge part of the Apple community at large, and so take a look at your projects and what you've been able to accomplish and where we're going to go in the next year. So that's kind of a tall order to do in a short period of time, but maybe we'll just start with, I guess, the Tidbits aspect. And I want to start there because you've been doing this for a while, and so I'm curious as to, has anything in the way you approach the Apple universe changed in your coverage for Tidbits?
Not hugely. Tidbits in some ways is, I don't want to say static because that isn't the right word. I think we are potentially trying even more than ever before to winnow out the wheat from the chaff. That there is a vast amount of, I would say, ink spilled. That's obviously not a relevant analogy in today's world. A vast number of electrons sacrificed in the name of news that is meaningless, completely and utterly nonsensical drivel. And it takes some time. Sometimes it takes some effort to separate out what's really going on from what everyone's all on Twitter about, quite literally, and see if there's something actually there. And so, I think that's, if anything, become a little bit more difficult in recent years. Just trying to say, is this actually important? Is there something we can say here? Something we can add to the discussion that's useful? Because sometimes, the topic may be perfectly good, but there's nothing we particularly need to say more that hasn't already been said too. We don't try to fill in. We don't try to publish something unless there's a need for it, put it that way.
That's an interesting choice. It seems like so many of the news outlets, as soon as there's a story, they feel almost obligated to put something up, whether they're adding anything to it or not. And I guess it's under the theory of, well, if someone only reads my site, then I need to make them aware of it. That probably doesn't happen much anymore, but
Well, no, I think there is. I think that is the idea, and the problem is you really run into a whole lot of situations with some event happens or something, some outlet writes a good story, and then everyone has to link to it with their take on it or this and that and the other thing. And I understand this is all nice and modern and bloggy and whatnot, but there's a whole lot of times when we'll start tracking down an article. You'll see something somewhere. You're like, oh, well, this isn't their article. They're linking to these people, and these people didn't do it either. They're linking here. And it's not until you go 2 or 3 or 4 steps down the line that you actually come to the original, which, not that people usually get it wrong, but, sometimes it is not the take that you thought it was.
If I could jump in for a second,
please.
I think what Adam is talking about is when some news thing becomes a big thing, and I think on the one hand, sometimes with Tidbits We just say, you know what, this is not that interesting. In the scope of publishing, 5 to 10 articles a week or whatever it is, this one's just not making the cut, not important. No one's going to look back in 5 years and remember this at all, or even in 5 weeks. And then Tidbits also has a device that is, I don't know, 6-10 years old. Adam will remember for sure, called Extra Bits. And that's where we do, have a little blurb that says, hey, there's this thing going on, here's maybe a sentence or two of our opinion, but if you really want to read about it, here's what we think is some of the best coverage elsewhere on the internet. So that's a way to bring some of that in to answer your original question, Chuck. Well, what about people who don't read that many different news venues? We do want to give them a kind of a picture of what's going on. So they do have to, have some of our editorial judgment about what they should bother reading about it all, but we don't feel that we have to read every word of it.
Still quite a lot, in fact. I mean, one of Josh Center's, as our managing editor, one of his tasks is to kind of collect that stuff. And often he'll give me a list of 4 or 5 things, and I'll say, yeah, 2 of them are good. The others, I just don't think they're, I know they might be being a big deal this week, but I just don't feel like they're something that really people need to know about. And I mean, there's this really interesting trope in the journalism community about the public needs to know. And, there's a whole lot of things that, speaking as part of the public, I really don't need to know, and so I have a pretty solid sense that there's a whole lot of things that other people in the public really don't need to know too. And so, it's very easy, particularly in a site that is aiming for clicks, aiming for eyeballs, that they just need to get as much content up as they can, because they'll get, even if on an article that's relatively low level, they'll still get a lot of views on that just because of the number of people they bring to the site, that it feels like they're just kind of feeding a content machine. And we both can't do that and don't really want to do that. That it's been talking to friends, and particularly with the demise of Macworld, people who have actually gone to some of those sites and talking to them afterwards. It's a real roller coaster. It's a wheel that's really hard to get off of.
Well, I think the other thing is to keep in mind is, first of all, I think we're approaching our 2nd-year anniversary of having hired this fellow Josh Centers, who's our managing editor, and he is, I don't know, maybe about a dozen years, maybe more than that, younger than us. So we were pleased to bring in someone who's younger to get that, younger perspective. But I would say, and for more so maybe for Adam than for me, because he is more involved in Tidbits day to day than I am. But I think a thing that wasn't just this past year, but it's been happening increasingly over the past 5 or 10 years, but certainly this year would be an example, is we're sort of having to learn how to sort of be graceful curmudgeons, as we get older, and we're like, yeah, the story's already happened 10 times, or, really, this is just not interesting. And so, we have to sort of had to learn how to, wield what, tiny bit of wisdom maybe coming our way as we continue to age on this planet, but sort of to try to find some graceful way to have that going on for us.
I want to pick out 2 phrases. You each used an interesting phrase. Adam, you said bloggy. Tonya, you said editorial judgment. And boy, I tell you what, I'm not sure those 2 could be farther apart, because we see
they shouldn't have to be far apart.
Well, maybe, I don't know, Tonya. I mean, we have friends, all of us, who run blogs, run successful blogs, run blogs that I do think actually add some value, but are primarily, populated with commentary on other people's posts. And then you flip over to the editorial judgment thing, and I guess there's some editorial judgment about what they're covering and what they're not. Sure. But it's another matter of the way you all do it, because you tend to take a more of a, I guess, in my mind, a frontline approach where you're actually covering a story if there's a story to be covered.
I think there's one of the things, and I find this interesting because I'll read a blog post and I'll be somewhat impressed, actually, that some people manage to, pull out a quote from some article and then write 2 paragraphs about it. whenever I try to do that sort of thing, what happens to me is that I pull out, or I sort of look at the quote. It's like, well, okay, here's what you have to know to understand where this is coming from. And here's what you have to know as a background to the technology to understand why this became a problem in the first place. And then here's what's actually happening. And so by the time that I finish explaining it to a point where I feel like someone who wasn't already reading and familiar with the entire situation could understand it, it's not 2 paragraphs anymore. I mean, it's a story. And I think that's a lot of it, is that the blog world, for better or worse, kind of assumes context is known at all times, which actually makes it really difficult if you do not have that context. And it's something which the blog world is, again, not very good at kind of bringing that back in. And so often when we are writing a story, I'll certainly go and read what everyone else has written, but I'll be trying to say, oh yeah, he makes a good point, he makes a good point. And okay, so now let's see if we can put all this together into a coherent whole, so someone doesn't have to trace back 3 or 4 posts on different blogs in different places, and to be able to put it all together. And that's just, I mean, I guess that maybe we're all old and fuddy-duddy in that regard, but it does feel to me like that's the only way you're going to be able to understand the situation if you are not already following everything all the time.
Right, and keep in mind, Tidbits was the original blog. I mean, we started in 1991. You can go read issues number 1 and 2, and they're charming.
Oh yeah.
Don't we all feel that
way? I recommend that you do that. It's kind of embarrassing.
I think they're such period pieces. But yeah, I mean, we were blogging before anyone had thought of that word. So,
Well, listen, I think everyone that's out there on the internet, in fact, everyone that's done anything, you go back to where you started, and it's like, oh man, that was bad, but you started, and here you are.
And I guess, again, I don't want to pick on blogs, because in fact, blogs have much more thought going on. I'm much more perturbed by, say, Twitter nowadays, that, the signal to noise ratio is just going down and down and down. And, not all of it can be attributed to Glenn, although,
But we're going to leave that. I'm leaving that alone. You can pursue it if you want,
Glenn. So yeah, but it is. I mean, it is one of those situations where obviously you feel like you have to participate because that's sort of the community water cooler. But at the same time, it's like water cooler. It's people chatting about meaningless stuff nonstop. And when you actually have to get work done, it can just be, frustrating to see that it looks like no one else in your world is working at all.
Well, I really loved Twitter for about 18 months. And then I kind of liked it for another year. And I still like it, but I feel like I got out of it what I wanted. And what I wanted was just to get people better, especially people who kind of have my job. Like, how do they go about their day? What do they think? How do they evaluate a breaking piece of news? How do they, what do they do when their kid gets home from school? Do they work on weekends? Just, and I got so many questions answered about how other people live. And it was actually really nice, because I found out that a lot of people live quite similarly to the way I do as far as their schedule goes. And they have similar, struggles and similar things that they like about their jobs. But after we kind of started approaching year 2 of Twitter, it's the same thing. Halloween comes around. It's the same as last year. Christmas comes around. It's the same as last year. Valentine's Day, people have wedding anniversaries. People make pancakes on Sunday morning. So I think that we're ready for something disruptive, something different to take that piece of brain space that Twitter and Facebook and those kind of take up that way of interacting. And I don't know what it's going to be. I'm not personally programming it, but I think we're ready. I don't just mean me. I'm ready, but I think increasingly people are ready.
Tonya, that's a really interesting perspective. I might submit to you that I know one thing I did a little while back, and it sort of refreshed me a little bit, was that I really went through the people I was following and did a lot of weeding. So I followed some new people. I got rid of some other people that I unfollowed, no offense. But, just what you were saying, the signal to noise, and the noise has gotten so high, and there seems to be so much competition within some people. For some people, it seems like they're in this competition to get eyeballs. And it's like, no, I don't want to be part of that anymore. That's why I don't post a lot of things outside of MacVoices. Some I like to share a little bit of my life, but not a lot.
Right.
Just because I don't think that the pancakes on Sunday morning for me are that interesting.
Well, they were for a little while. I thought the pancakes on Sunday morning posts actually have gone way down.
Yeah, but at the same time, I mean, nobody, unless I'm having a really special dinner somewhere or it's a destination. I mean, if I'm in Paris, yeah, okay, I'm sorry, I'm in Paris. I'm going to tweet it. If I'm down the street at the diner, probably not. So it just depends on your attitude. But I think that I think you need to take a good hard look at that, because you're right. The signal to noise thing is going downhill.
Well, the variant on that I've been quite enjoying actually is Strava, which is it's a site that you upload your workouts to. So if I go running, my Garmin GPS watch automatically records what I do, and through a series of machinations uploads it to the site. And you follow friends there too, but you tend to follow people you actually know. That you know in person, and that you care about in some more significant way. And for those of us in that community, it makes a much more interesting way of interacting because it's so focused. So Sky, I run with, I don't know him super well. He's a grad student at Cornell. He's come on some long runs with me, and I would just sort of notice he's like, so a random run in the Grindelwald. And I'm like, what the heck's the Grindelwald? And I glance at the map. It's completely unfamiliar because it shows you a little map of where the person ran each time. And it turns out he's in Switzerland, and that's kind of cool. Or another friend of mine is at a conference in San Francisco. And so she's posting about how she went on a run across the Golden Gate while it was foggy, and I don't, if she's just posting about, oh, she's in San Francisco, that's not nearly as interesting. But this is someone I run with a lot, and therefore, can kind of, envision what it's like and all of that. And had I been there, would certainly have done it with her, because running across the Golden Gate is kind of cool. And so I think there's some of what we maybe start seeing is more focused social networks, just like we had, Usenet to begin with. And then it got more and more fragmented and mailing lists. And then, and now you've got these, very, very specific communities, because you can't have, one mailing list about Macintosh stuff like we used to, or one news group. It's gotten way more specific, and that may be kind of a combination of what the social media services are going to run into too, which is people are going to start aligning around very specific groups and kinds of activities.
In a way, I'm surprised at some of that. The Twitter, I'm going to pick on Twitter since we're all familiar with that, because we're not even going toward Facebook. That's a whole different thing. But there hasn't been a little more promotion of things like that, of some way to say I'm interested in A, B, C, and D, instead of just having it a free-for-all. It's sort of a manual process now, and we've all three gone through it as far as picking out people that and people and accounts that address things that we are interested in. Might be the Mac, might be Apple, might be cooking, might be car racing, might be house painting. I don't know, but you sort of do that now, and that's sort of the beauty of it. If you exercise the right restraint and aren't afraid to unfollow people that don't follow your signal to noise ratio philosophy.
Yeah, but it's hard, and and as the other aspect of that though is not just having it be virtual. Having it be a virtual complement to something that's already happening in the real world.
Yeah, well, that's a challenge that we're all facing right now, I think.
Yeah.
So to take this back to Tidbits and Take Control. Take Control, of course, are the series of books that you all publish, the ebooks that you publish. I'm curious if Tonya, to go to your editorial judgment comment, does the editorial... does the content aspect of Take Control affect the editorial content of Tidbits?
Not very much. I mean, there's some obvious overlap because we both kind of cover the Apple universe, plus related stuff. So, when iOS 8 came out, obviously Tidbits had content and we had a book. And sometimes when it comes to the books, there'll be some piece of material that just doesn't fit very well in the book, but should exist somewhere. And I'll say, could you please write a Tidbits article about this? Because then the book can link to the article and it's together, and it's nice that we can do that. So they're largely just different because they're the books are so long and the an article is short. We do it is nice that we're all the same company. So when a book comes out, Adam usually writes a little article in Tidbits, kind of announcing the book. So obviously that's a pretty direct influence of content. And, we'll give the author an opportunity maybe to do an excerpt or to write an article about the particular topic. Also, to kind of draw interest to the book. So there's definitely connections. I think Adam has something to add.
I'll say the other thing that we did, we've done over the last year or so, is we've started streaming some of the books in Tidbits for our members.
That's right.
And
yeah. And some of the books are appearing in Tidbits.
So the idea there is that we have, I think 2,800 Tidbits members right now, and these are people who have contributed some amount of money to help keep Tidbits running, which is great. And one of the ways that we're thanking them and kind of drawing them in a little bit.
I want to interrupt Adam to say the Tidbits members are beyond great. They are essential and enormously appreciated. We simply could not do Tidbits without them.
The advertising world is distinctly having more and more trouble as time goes on. And so having content supported by the people who are consuming it is just the best way to go, because then we know who we're working for. Put bluntly,
Wow, that you said a mouthful right there. The people you're working for, that's a really interesting perspective.
There's that phrase. It's often used to diss Google of if you're not if you're not the if you're not the customer, you're the product or something.
Oh, that's if you're not part of the problem, you're part of this. Yeah. If you're not part of the solution, you're part of the problem. If you're not on the bus, get off the bus, or where did you start?
Who knows? Who knows? Chase it back. But it's been interesting kind of tracing that kind of thinking around further. So for instance, it's not actually correct with Google. You're not really the product. You're actually a business asset to them, which is a different thing entirely. But take, for instance, the App Store, the Mac App Store, where all upgrades have to be free according to Apple's requirements. And people can kind of get around that. But for the most part, all upgrades are free. Well, if you think about it, if you're not paying for an upgrade, you're no longer a customer. You're a user. The developer has very little incentive to keep you happy. You've paid them. You're never going to pay them again. By definition, you're not going to pay them again. And so, when a developer is selling outside the App Store and charging for a major upgrade, they know they have to make that upgrade appeal to the entire audience of people they can talk to as easily as possible, their actual customers. And so, you tend to see a lot less movement in some ways on those major upgrades because you don't. If you're a user of Program X, you don't want Program X to completely and utterly change just because of we're now got a different design look for everything, because that makes your customers unhappy and they're not going to upgrade. You're not going to earn any money. No. So, but similarly, take it to the next level with media. If you're, basically, if the media is, if you're reading news that is supported by ads, well, you're back to being a business asset. You're the thing that allows that company to keep putting out that content. And, it just changes a little bit of who you're writing for. And, if you're writing to attract as many eyeballs as possible, that's very different than if you're writing to provide the information that the people who have actually paid you for the information want to read.
And one of the things we keep hearing from people who pay us for information, regardless of whether they're reading Tidbits or Take Control, is that, boy, there's an awful lot to know these days. It keeps changing, and they're really tired of reading long stuff. Or, so one of the reasons why we started this process where we'll take say a 10-chapter book, and we'll publish we'll do a pretty good draft. The author writes it, it's read by a couple editors, so it's not too rough, and then we'll publish it week by week in tidbits. So if someone wants to read it, first of all, they have to be a tidbits member, and second of all, they can read it on a week-by-week basis. And we have heard from some folks that this is a really nice way to learn, because they don't get this whole 150-page book that they have to read all at once, or they might feel that they should read all at once. They just got a chapter a week. So we've gotten feedback from some folks that that's a good way to go. And then for us, it's a good way to go because we don't have to wait as long to develop the full 150 pages and make sure it's all correct and polished up. We can start publishing chapters earlier in the process. So if it's a topic that is changing very quickly, we can start getting content out a lot faster for people.
I've always had the impression, the feeling, and I think it's an accurate one, that both tidbits and take control, for the models that they are, you work hard to try to keep it a fairly tight, concise kind of product. And yet,
yes, but somehow we still come up with these really long books.
Well, it turns out there's a lot to say.
Well, yeah, and
the world is a complicated place.
It's just not bloggy enough the way we do it anymore, is it?
Well, but that's kind of my point, because I find it here too. I prefer an in-depth kind of thing, and it's the thing that just drives me crazy is you turn on the evening news. I don't, and you see.
Why would you do that? Sorry.
Just go with the example.
Mistake number one.
Sorry. Okay. Never mind.
But the example is that you turn it on and in-depth reporting. Well, the in-depth reporting is 3.5 minutes as opposed to the usual minute and a half that you get with the other stories, and it just makes me crazy because there's no way that it can be in-depth. But people have now come to believe that that's in-depth reporting, and that really bothers me. And that's where I have to wonder how you all, knowing that you like to be thorough and comprehensive, but not too wordy. I mean, how do you address that?
It's hard, honestly. I mean, it's because it really, it's just really, really difficult because you are constantly being faced with that tension of, I want to explain this.
Here's how we addressed it, among other ways. We come up with a whole new kind of book this year.
Yeah.
We have a lot of projects. So we started doing this new kind of take control book. So in addition to the whole thing where we're streaming chapters over in tidbits, so we can really only do 1 or 2, maybe 3 at the most books like that per year in tidbits, because there's only so many weeks in a year, and it takes a certain amount of time to get a project going. So we came up with this idea that the whole mission of the Take Control ebook series was difficult for us to fulfill, because if you say something like take control of iCloud, well, that's a pretty tall order, because you're taking control of this thing. That's like everything you could ever need to know, plus background information. And people don't always want to read all that. So we came up with the idea of crash courses, which is more like the things that you really most essentially need to know so that you can stay out of trouble. And we did, how many? 3 crash courses this year. 4 crash courses, because 1 is free.
Yeah.
And those books, those are books that are comprised of very, very short chapters, so that you do get the whole book at once in its usual way, but when you start reading about a topic, it's short and concise and just what we think is the most important. And we got rid of a lot of extra words.
Yeah, those were designed to be quite different. So it's a 2-column layout in the PDF, so that you can have text on the left and screenshots on the right. And so just not having to quite tell a story where it's all linear, but you can have a bullet list, which is going to tell you the salient facts, and then link those over to the illustrative screenshots. Really can make a lot of difference. Plus, the other thing we're really trying to do with the crash courses is to have quite a lot of short chapters. So it's not like you get into something and have to read 20 pages. Each chapter is going to be 2, 3, 5 pages at most.
We started out with the rule that they should be no longer than 3 pages, but some of them kind of came out at 5 pages long. So So we tried.
Well, and the other thing that we're doing, which is actually really interesting with the crash courses, is they are designed to both talk and listen. In that each chapter, again, a couple pages at most, ends with a share box. And the share box, as we call it, enables you to share that chapter. I mean, literally, a link to that entire chapter. Every one of these books exists completely on the web, so anyone can read it on the web for free. And it also allows you to comment on it. So you can go to the web page for the chapter, and then actually you can just do full, as you would expect, internet commenting. And so not too surprisingly, I think, sort of that's the goal. People haven't been commenting that much. If you write well, people don't actually comment all that much because you've answered their questions. They don't have more questions. But we have been seeing, that being able to share the information has also been really useful, and just in terms of getting it out there a little bit more, letting people talk about it and retweet it and all of that, and then having the entire text of the book on the web exposes it to the world. One of the problems that books have is they're containers. And you can't look inside the container unless you buy the book. But how do you know what is in the book? And so, and certainly in today's world, we're all used to just looking for the answer on Google. And so we wanted to have our answers be in Google too. So, we're happy to give away a chapter, and you really probably don't want to read the entire thing online on our site, but you're certainly welcome to if you want to. It will be a little bit of a frustrating experience.
It will be rather dull.
Each time you move from chapter to chapter, it puts up a dialogue telling you that you're going to need to wait for a minute or so.
Go buy the book.
And go buy the book.
Go the book. I think it's a really, there's so many dynamics to the crash course thing, and Tonya had been on to talk about that when it first launched, and I really loved it. In fact, I know every so often I'll see one come across my Twitter stream, and I'll flip it into MacVoices magazine because I want to give it the exposure because I like it. It's well, it's a tip, but it's not. It goes beyond being a tip.
That's what we were trying for.
Yeah, and the commenting thing, frankly, Tonya, I'm not sure we mentioned that when you and I talked about it originally. So, folks, when you see that, you can comment.
Possible that we didn't have the comments.
No, we did. We did.
Originally.
It's been working.
Yeah.
Not that many people have done it, which, as I said, I'm in some ways happy about. I just certainly don't want to spend my time having huge conversations about each chapter. But at the same time, I do want people to be able to ask a question, or if they're confused about something, make that clear.
Yeah, well, this didn't come in as a comment; it came in as email. But in the free book that we did, the Read Me First book, it's a lot of real fundamentals that in a lot of tech writing, we hope that people already know these fundamentals. So the point of this book is to just put it out there for people who don't know the fundamentals. And there's a whole chapter about keyboards and, what's on the keys and stuff, and how do you know where the option key is and stuff. And I got an email just a day or two ago from someone in the UK reminding me that their keyboards are different in a few places. Yeah, so we'll go back and revise that. But then, of course, we would probably have pretty much any country is going to have a slightly localized keyboard, but that's a good point too.
There's a few of them, but it is. And actually, that book's been interesting because it is totally free and there's no interruptions for anyone. Can just go read that on the web. But we've gotten people who have said basically, thank you for putting this out because I really didn't understand this stuff before, and this is really basic stuff.
The one thing this book really hammers in about 6 different ways is like, what the hell is the desktop on the Mac? Like, why is it that you can put your stuff on it, but it's also sort of a thing in, your Finder directory? And like, is it the same place if you just put an icon on your desktop, just, over on your monitor or somewhere? Is it at the same place as the desktop that shows up in your save dialog? Like, it doesn't quite it does make sense, but it's not just obvious, So there's just a lot of stuff like that. That's
right.
Really
there's a whole lot of things that if you've, for whatever reason, just never gotten, or, you really are new to it. People do come to this stuff new, even still.
Or you just never paid attention.
No one tells you this stuff anymore. And so, we have no illusions that someone's going to buy a book based on this, the super duper basics. But, you do need to be this tall to play. And so the whole goal of that book is to get you to be tall enough.
Yeah. And you're right. And I'm not sure. I may disagree with that, Adam, because I think there is still a need for the basics and updated basics, because Apple does keep changing the game.
Oh, there's a need for it. I just don't think anyone would buy it.
I think that people who need really basic help, first of all, are not going to buy an ebook because they're not going to even find the ebook store.
Yeah, good point.
Also, I think at this point, when people need basic help, they tend to be coming at it from some kind of unusual angle. So like when I write a book, I can't write a book that is going to be perfect for every possible reader. You have to kind of pick your audience. And I think a lot of the people coming at computers who profoundly need basic help, that some of their problem is that they're not in that basic audience that books tend to be written for. And they're not even close. They're like, they talk about, putting the square peg through the round hole. These people are octagons. They're kite shaped. Like they're just totally coming at it from left field. So a book is probably not what they need. They need one-on-one instruction or a small class, really, so they can really ask their questions of a person who will sit with them and try to figure out what their question is so that they can answer it. But I don't think that there's enough dialogue in a book or even in email with a book's author. I think it's just not a very effective way to get help for someone who is just really, really at sea.
Yeah. And someone with a lot more patience, certainly, than I have. This edition of MacVoices is sponsored by Drobo. Simple, safe, expandable storage for your data. What did you do in 2014? Did you get a new iPhone 6 and start taking photos with it? Any special birthdays? Maybe someone turned 6. Maybe someone turned 60. How about videos of your kid's swim meet, dance recital, or basketball game? Maybe you developed that big new project for the office. Finally got around to making the leap to paperless living. Or maybe you jumped on the quantified lifestyle bandwagon and started tracking how you eat, sleep, and exercise. Or maybe you did something just for you. Worked on something for National Novel Writing Month, wrote a poem, started that inventory of items in the attic. Maybe you finally got all your financial records in order, recording profits and losses, dates of stock purchases and sale, a list of your CDs, and got your insurance up to date. That sure was a ton of work. A lot gets done in a year. And what if, in a second, all that went away? Poof, like 2014 never happened. That would be bad. Worse is the idea that you can't recreate the majority of that, because it happens only once and it's gone. I know. That sounds like a hard sell kind of scenario. I really, really don't want it to. But at the same time, I talk to a number of people every single year who have this happen to them. A hard drive they thought was bulletproof went bad, and irreplaceable items were lost. Irreplaceable items. That's exactly why you need Drobo. With Drobo, you get storage that isn't dependent upon 1 or 2 or even 3 hard drives. With the Drobo Gen 3, you get up to 4 hard drives that use Drobo's Beyond RAID technology to protect your data if one drive goes bad. If you're really paranoid about things, like me, you can set it up so that if 2 drives fail at the same time, you're still protected. The 3rd Gen Drobo even has a built-in SSD cache and battery, so that your data is protected even when it's being written to the drive, in case power goes out at precisely the worst possible time. I think data safety is the best thing about Drobo. I've lost data to plenty of hard drive crashes, but I have never, repeat, never, lost any data stored on a Drobo. Hard drives come, hard drives go, but the data is safe and secure. Of course, there are plenty of other things to love about the Gen 3 Drobo, like the fact that it can be set up with an optimized time machine volume to help you make your backups even more painless. Like the fact that it's easy to understand because of the traffic signal-like indicator lights. Green is good, yellow is caution, red is stop, something's really wrong. Like the fact that there's no real setup or technical work to do when you get your Drobo. Slide the drives in, install the Drobo desktop, plug it into your Mac, and you've got safe, secure, expandable storage. Yes, I said expandable. Your Drobo Gen 3 can take pretty much any hard drive you throw at it, from 200 gigabyte drives the whole way up to 8 terabyte drives. Get as much storage as you need now, and then upgrade later when you need more. And upgrading is simple. Slide your smallest drive out, slide the new, larger drive in, and keep on working. No need to shut down the Drobo or perform some mystical technical incantation. The Drobo does all the work so you can have all the fun. I could go on, and I have been for the last several editions of MacVoices, about the benefits of Drobo. For now, though, you need to get on the stick, because while the Drobo Gen 3 is a great value at $349 list, it's an even better value if you go right now to drobostore.com/MacVoices and use the offer code HOLIDAYCHUCK to get $90 off that price. Or use that same code to take the same $90 off a Thunderbolt-equipped 5-bay Drobo 5D or the network-attached 5-bay Drobo 5N. No matter which Drobo you select, you get all the safety, security, and expandability Drobo is known for. And while you're enjoying your holiday break, you should visit drobo.com/MacVoices to register to win a free Gen 3 Drobo. That would make a great New Year's gift for someone, or for yourself. I repeat, I have never lost data in a Drobo, and I've been relying on them for years. That's why I want you to go to drobostore.com/MacVoices and use the code HOLIDAYCHUCK, all uppercase please, to get $90 off the Gen 3 Drobo, Drobo 5D, or Drobo 5N. That offer's only good until midnight, December 29th, so get moving. When you do, your 2014 data will be safe, and all the precious data you'll be creating in 2015 and 2016 and beyond. Drobo, simple, safe, expandable storage for your data. Thanks to Drobo for their support of MacVoices. Well, before we burn out the entire time here just covering this stuff, I want to zoom out to the 30,000-foot level a bit and ask you, thank you for the illustration, Tonya. What would you say the top 3 important events were for 2014 for Apple? I mean, there are a lot of things we could talk about and trends and all that, but are there 3 that stand out in your mind? Or are there 2? Is there even one that stands out in your mind as this is really defining of Apple in 2014?
I will say that, well, partly because I'm looking at it, the Retina iMac, I think that's actually a really important thing. I have to work on 2 monitors because, well, I do. I need that kind of screen real estate. And so I paired a 27-inch Retina iMac with a 27-inch Thunderbolt display. And let me tell you, a Thunderbolt display has never looked so bad. So I mean, I think the thing that's fascinating about the Retina display is we've seen them before. I mean, Retina is itself not new. But what is new is when you bring it up to 5K display, I mean, whatever it is, 5220 by 2880, I can never quite remember. That's really big. And the Thunderbolt display next to it just doesn't compare. And so I think seeing Apple moving more and more in that direction, you didn't really notice it until you just had the opportunities to see what Retina was comparatively, and that's something which we're going to be seeing more and more of. And it's technically hard. Apple talked a lot about the special chip they had to build into the Retina iMac to be able to handle the monitor and this and that and the other thing. And I've been reading up on it more. With a lot of the 4K displays, you actually have to have 2 monitor connections because they actually drive each half of the panel separately. It's just DisplayPort can't handle that kind of throughput. So I think that's something we're going to be seeing more of, and was kind of a big deal to see Apple finally break into the big Retina display market in 2014. Well, let's see other stuff that happened. What else happened?
Well, okay, I'll toss something out that to me is an interesting play off of each other. First of all, Apple seems to be becoming more socially conscious in so many ways. And there are a couple stories going around right now about, as we record this, about the BBC or video documentary thing. At the same time, Apple seems to be changing financially because it's achieved and pretty much cemented its position as the largest company in the world. They did a 7-for-1 stock split this year. So it's really interesting, I think, how those I see those as 2 different ends of a spectrum, but I'm not even sure what the spectrum is. It just seems to be very financially, fiscally aware of what's going on, and maybe more so than it's ever been in its history, and yet they're addressing so many social issues as well.
Yeah, I've actually tried to avoid some of this coverage of the social issues because I think there's a whole lot more going on there than we know, in both directions, possibly. So we had lunch, a year and a half ago with a woman just totally randomly. I actually have some relatives who live in China, and she had met my relatives. And so we were at lunch with her at Cornell when she was here. And her specialty was unions in China. And so, yeah, she had a really interesting perspective on the whole Foxconn thing. This is, a couple of years, this was back when Foxconn was a big deal in the news. And it became pretty clear to me that what we were hearing was heavily filtered but in a variety of ways. It wasn't even clear that there was just one story that was being given out, So I've kind of shied away from that on the sense that it seems to me that you really need someone in China who is familiar with all this stuff to comment on it before you're going to get a reasonable perspective that has a bearing in reality. Apple obviously is going to be saying all the right things, and because Apple is so prominent, anyone who wants to make a big fuss about a story is going to paint Apple in a bad light. So it just becomes a he said, she said kind of thing, and you don't really know where the truth of the matter lies because both sides have significant incentive to make themselves, make their extremes look good.
But I guess from where I sit, it's because we follow Apple so intently, for whatever reason.
Sun just came out here.
Yeah, I can tell. Adam suddenly got angelic.
I was going to say, yeah, there we go. Hang on.
No, we follow Apple so intently, and you start to become aware, I guess, of some of the biases that are being painted into these stories, and then you step back a minute and say, "Gee, have I been really looking at the rest of the news reporting, the rest of the world, through those same filters and not even knowing it?"
Everything is completely subjective.
but I think it's an interesting education point that, it just goes back to something I think we talked about years and years ago when MacNotable started, that you can't get your news from one source, and you have to be a bit suspect about whose agenda is coloring the stories.
Yeah, right. That's absolutely true. I guess part of the reason why I have a little trouble sometimes with Apple talking about how wonderful they are is that you look at something like the App Store, or with iOS 8 extensibility. We've got these apps, they're accepted, and then Apple freaks out and says, no, you can't do that, and pulls the app. And there's a media firestorm, and Apple says, oh, well, never mind, we didn't mean it, reverses course. Or maybe they just, don't reverse course. But it's a situation where clearly there's a lot of tension within Apple between, letting people innovate and letting other people have any kind of control whatsoever. Apple is the very definition of control freak. And so, they are so completely unwilling to set down in stone what's allowed and what's not. And so developers end up wasting vast amounts of time and energy, and there has to be huge drama all the time when someone's app is rejected, or is pulled from the App Store because Apple decided it no longer likes that. That kind of behavior, to my mind, really throws some real questions on anything else the company says. Because they're clearly spinning it to make themselves, sort of look good and meet their own needs, and that's fine. I'm not offended that they're doing that, but it does make them a somewhat less than credible source at times too. Yeah. So and they may be right, they may be wrong. I'm not saying they are. I'm just saying that I don't inherently believe everything they say any more so than any other large organization with a major multi-billion-dollar axe to grind.
Yeah, well, and that's sort of the nature of where they've gotten, is that they do have axes to grind, and those axes are pretty big, and they cut a lot of things. So it's natural that they would do it. Yeah. And it just means we have to be more aware consumers.
Yeah, and I guess just to go back a little bit, I would say that is actually one of the other big stories I would say of 2014 actually is iOS 8 extensibility. both in terms of the good that it exists, and Apple is, wow, letting people actually do some things that were not envisioned by Apple to begin with, in terms of how iOS users can interact with iOS. But at the same time, the other side of that story is how uncomfortable Apple is with some of the things that people have done, which don't seem all that evil, like, ooh, putting a calculator, a notification center. What is the world coming to? People are going to start, doing calculator porn or something. So it's, that's one of, oh, come on, the Easter egg in pCalc.
Not going there, Adam.
So in any event, that's something which I think is definitely a larger story than perhaps we obviously didn't know about it until late in the year. But I think it does reflect further back than that, because Apple obviously been working on iOS 8 for a long time. And so just the fact that Apple was looking at opening it up more and allowing all these extensions, allowing the share sheet extensions, allowing the keyboard extensions, allowing the notification center widget extensions, that's a big deal. That's nice to see Apple doing, and like to see more of that.
Tonya, you have a nomination?
Well, just to expand a little bit on the extensibility that Adam already mentioned, I remember, I think it was after WWDC when there was the keynote for WWDC, I remember commenting that basically it seemed like Apple had addressed a number of really long-standing customer complaints. So we had extensibility, we had family sharing. Now, I'm not saying family sharing is perfect, but it's definitely a long-standing complaint that it's too hard to share media in a family. And what was the other one? Oh, iCloud Drive.
iCloud Drive, yeah.
In the way it was presented at WWDC,
sounded way better.
Sounded even better than it is. But just to kind of be looking at what file sharing services like Dropbox are bringing to the mix and seeing if they could add some component of that to iCloud. And I felt, kind of as an outsider looking in, I mean, I know I'm sort of an insider outsider, but the fact is I don't work there, so I'm basically an outsider. It kind of felt like with Steve Jobs in control, Apple just sort of did what it did, and it was very locked down. And it felt like just maybe in this sort of new Tim Cook era that there were taking customer complaints a little more to heart and trying to figure out ways to engineer around them to make solutions. So that was a big thing. The other thing in iOS 8 that I think is just super neat is the whole health connection thing and the health app, because for people who have particular health things or fitness thingies going on where they want to start recording data into their phone and communicating that data to a medical practitioner or a coach or something like that, I think there's going to be a whole lot of really neat applications coming out in the next few years, but it's just the fact that it's in iOS 8 is the first step.
Yeah, I'm going to be curious to what ends up with the health app to see. It's one of those things where I've opened it a few times and I've connected it to Strava, which is about the only thing I feed it. But I don't quite know what it's going to do yet.
You need a little device that works with your phone. So, and I don't actually know of a real life person who does this, but it just seems like if you need to monitor your glucose or you need to record certain things about your physiological state and you want your doctor to get that information right away and you want it all kind of in a nice system, that this should be allowing that to happen. And if it's not already, it should be really soon. And anything that can be done to make interacting with your healthcare people more efficient is a good thing, in my opinion. So
here's another thing which I think is actually a significant story for the year, which started obviously with the celebrity photo hack. Basically the whole issue of iCloud security, and not just iCloud security, but just security in the online world. And I think Apple, they honestly didn't do a fabulous job with that one. I mean, it doesn't seem as though it was any significant widespread breach of iCloud security that caused the photos to be hacked. It sounds like it was more social hacks and individual targeted users being targeted. But there was still this sense from Apple that, two-factor authentication is the answer. Better security questions. and and more education. And it felt to me like that was somewhat missing the point, which is that you are never going to get people to be secure. People stink at that. That they don't see it as a problem. They're too busy. They're not thinking. They're doing, basically people are always the weak link. And so, I would sort of hope to see Apple doing more kinds of things that protect privacy and increase security without the user having to know a lot or be very careful at all times. And so hopefully that's more the way they're working. We don't know. They changed a little bit of stuff, but not huge amounts.
Well, and then there's Apple Pay.
Apple Pay is a good example of in fact, right. You don't have to know a lot for Apple Pay to be secure.
And we might have pulled out Apple Pay right away as the most amazing thing Apple did this year by far, except that our credit card doesn't yet support it. So we haven't gotten a lot of personal experience with it, and also just living where we do and the kinds of products that we buy at, our local.
We might be able to shop at one store using Apple Pay.
Yeah, we shop. It's going to take a little while for, I think, it to come to smaller local places up here in Ithaca.
One of the things that we wrote when we were covering it in Tidbits is I think Apple Pay is a long-term play.
Oh, for sure.
That Apple doesn't even want people using it who aren't the early adopters who figure things out. And because if you notice, there's very little documentation about it.
Well, there's not very much to say. Well, we have a whole chapter about it in the iOS 8 book.
There's not very much documentation about it. Apple has actually done not very much marketing surrounding it. That this is a field which is entirely new to the company. The company has never really done financial services before. And they, frankly, are being smart to take it slow. Take it slow, let your early adopters into it now, and they'll slowly convert some more people after 6 months or a year or whatever, when you've got much more of your physical infrastructure, because keep in mind, it's only iPhone 6 and 6 Plus at the moment.
And it'll add a few more iPhones for Apple Watch.
Yeah, and they'll add a few more phones once the Apple Watch comes out, and the iPad, recent iPads can do online stuff with Apple Pay. But so right now it's pretty limited that way too. So, but again, wait a year, wait 2 years until most of the devices really support it. And that's when I think, and Apple has really figured out what the quirks are. Maybe they figured out how to monetize it better, on the back end. Maybe they figured out they can't monetize it in certain ways and have to change gears. Who knows? But once they have a better idea of how it all works, I think that's when we'll start to see them really, really push on Apple Pay, where it will become a major marketing effort.
And I think you've hit on one of the big, I don't know if it's a big story for this past year or it's just a big story about Apple, but it's a way to think about Apple, that they do play the long game. They're example after example after example. Sometimes the long game changes and they change with it. Sometimes they change the long game themselves. Yeah. But they aren't looking for the quick hit. Oh, got to rush something to market to take advantage of this trend or that trend. And I like it because I don't feel like I waste my money with Apple. I don't feel like I've ever wasted my money with Apple. The devices, don't just come and go like some companies who just seem to deliver the flavor of the month. And the
that
services.
Said, the whole iPhone 6, everything's got to be bigger. Not happy about that.
Well, I don't know, Adam. Some people like it.
Some people. Nothing.
No, I don't think Adam's got an issue with some people. It's more that we want choices.
Right. Yeah. And so choices are big or bigger. That's not actually a choice. And the design. A lot of the design things about the iPhone. The iPhone 6 is. Put it this way, every previous iPhone, I believe, was sort of unalloyed better. The iPhone 6 annoys me at times. Yeah, it's better in some ways, but I hate the position of the sleep-wake button. I really don't like the, it fits in my pants pocket, but not great. I do feel it, where I never did with other iPhones. I find it slippery. There's just a number of things about it which I do not like as well as I liked the iPhone 5 that I had before it. And so, that feels to me like, Apple's making a mistake, and there's a lot of people out there who really, really don't, who are already a little irritated at the iPhone 5 being bigger than the iPhone 4 and, and really don't want to get to go up in size yet again because they're not large people with large pockets and, all that. They just want something that they can hold. Remember when cell phones used to be really small? And the whole idea was that you got the smallest possible phone. Well, and now we're in the complete other side of the pendulum. So, that's something which I do think it feels a little bit like Apple is going with the trend rather than thinking about it.
Well, there's nothing wrong with them having a bigger phone too. Sorry about the cough there. It's just you want there to be a choice.
And I only have one thing to respond to that because I agree with what you're saying. I think that Apple was brilliant in calling this thing the iPhone when it first came out because a phone was something we were all carrying, we could all identify with. Now it's become the phone. I mean, the meme is that.
When was the last time you made a call?
Exactly. Thank you. Yes, that's exactly it. So I think that if you were to market today, I just announced it got phone only.
They could call it an iPod.
Well. Yeah, there was discussion about would there be another version of an iPod, whatever that is. I think at one point some people were speculating that would be the Apple Watch. They might call it the new version of the iPod. So I don't think that this is a phone anymore, and I think people get a little bit hung up on that idea.
Hung up, ha ha.
Oh, sorry. Yeah. Ouch. I don't know. 2015 is looking bright and exciting in so many ways because more of the long game will play out. There are new things that Apple will undoubtedly come out with, and I would expect as much from Tidbits and Take Control too. That you all
well, and certainly the Apple Watch is the big thing.
Oh yeah,
that's really the we
got to decide if we get one or two of those things. The frustrating thing about getting the first Apple Watch is okay. So who here wants to bet there's going to be another Apple Watch in November of 2015?
Oh, sure.
Well, that's a real question because, $350 watches are not the sort of thing people replace every year or two.
I know, and that's what's so frustrating about it.
That's going to be...
but there will have to be one here at Take Control HQ because
yes.
At least one.
I think
one should be sufficient.
One will be sufficient for starters, but we only have one Pebble and things like that, and it's fine. So, but it is going to be tremendously interesting to see what happens there because. As with the iPod and the iPhone and the iPad, none of these things were truly revolutionary. It was more that they took a field and just set it in a very specific direction that was way better than it had ever been in before. And so, much as I like the Pebble and I, like my Garmin Forerunner 620 and things like that, I think it's going to be really interesting to see what Apple can bring to it.
Agreed. And I know you too. There are probably secret projects deep in the basement of the Tidbits headquarters that are being worked on right now.
No, the main thing we're trying, we just replaced our 19-year-old Subaru Outback with a 2015 Subaru Outback with all the technology.
They put a lot of stuff in cars in the last 20 years. We're having so much fun with this thing.
Take control of your Subaru Outback.
It is just fascinating, actually, from a technology and documentation standpoint of how Subaru has chosen to do this stuff. Both how they're designing the technology, how they're designing the interfaces, what restrictions you have when you don't have a screen, when you do have a screen, how you use the screen, all of these, like you have to be within this zone for your little key fob to work. And how does that work if you want to unlock all the doors rather than just one? It's really, it's fascinating to look at.
There are lots of people listening to this who have bought a car more recently than we did. So, but we're all at Twitter about it, actually.
But nonetheless, there is always that question of and what would an interface like this look like if Apple was doing it? Just because that's what we're used to, and they do really nice interfaces. And sometimes you think, wow, Apple would have done that way better, and other times you think, man, this is pretty good. This is, I'm not seeing a way that this could be done, sort of much more efficiently.
Right. Well, guys, thank you. Thank you both for everything in 2014 and 15, or 2014. We look for more in 2015.
Always. It never stops.
But
yes.
you guys,
that's the one thing you can be sure of.
Yes.
There will be more.
Good. Good. Well, we're glad, because Tidbits and Take Control are two of the places I know I'm spoiled. I go to get the kind of concise information we were talking about, and we really appreciate it. So,
glad to hear it, Chuck.
Yeah. Well, happy holidays. Happy New Year to both of you.
Happy New Year.
Indeed, indeed. I hope you're taking some time off and not podcasting for a few days.
Nah.
Okay, we'll go opening the next present.
Control of your holiday break.
Yeah. Yeah. Write it up for me, Tonya. I'll do it. Hey, thanks again. We'll talk to you soon.
All right.
Folks, I'm Chuck Joyner. This is Mac Notables on Mac Voices. Tonya and Adam Engst are two of the stars here. We really appreciate them, along with all the other Mac Notables, and we appreciate you for listening. Until the next time, thanks for watching. Visit MacVoices.com for links, show notes, to subscribe, to connect with Chuck on Twitter, Google+, YouTube, Facebook, LinkedIn, and the Mac Voices blog. Subscribe to our weekly newsletter, the Mac Voices Dispatch, to stay up to date on all the latest Mac Voices news from our front page or at macvoices.com/newsletter. Do more with your Apple tech by subscribing to the free Mac Voices magazine on Flipboard by visiting macvoices.com/magazine. Advertising and sponsorships handled by Backbeat Media at backbeatmedia.com. Bandwidth provided by CacheFly at cachefly.com.